The wind didn't just blow across northern Montana that winter. It hunted. It tore through the valley like something with teeth, ripping fence posts loose from frozen ground, rattling barn doors until the hinges screamed, swallowing footsteps so completely that a person could vanish between one breath and the next. Most folks locked their doors before sunset. The smart ones understood that the frontier didn't negotiate. It took what it wanted, and mercy wasn't part of the transaction. That's why nobody saw the girl walking alone down the frozen road outside Black Hollow Valley. Not at first. She looked like a shadow that had separated from the tree line, thin enough that the wind should have knocked her sideways, wrapped in a brown coat so threadbare you could see through the elbows when the light hit it right. Her boots had cracked open at the soles weeks ago. Snow soaked through them somewhere around midday, and by now her feet had gone past hurting into something worse, numbness that felt like erasure. Her name was Rowan Vale, 26 years old, though she looked older in the wrong light and younger in the right one, alone in the way that settles into your bones after enough years. She'd stopped feeling hunger the previous afternoon. That scared her more than the cold. She'd been hungry before. Hungry was familiar, almost comfortable in its constancy. But when hunger disappeared entirely, when your body stopped asking for what it needed, that meant something had broken inside. That meant your system was shutting down the way a house goes dark room by room when nobody pays the electric bill. For 3 weeks, she'd walked from town to town looking for work. Every place ended the same way. Men looking at her like she was a problem they didn't want to solve. Women whispering when they thought she couldn't hear, their voices carrying that particular tone of pity mixed with relief that whatever had happened to her hadn't happened to them. Store owners claiming they had no positions available while staring directly at the patches on her coat, like those repairs were evidence of some moral failing. Too thin, too strange, too poor, too alone. And on the frontier, alone wasn't just dangerous, it was damning. The storm hit hard just past nightfall. Snow came sideways across the valley, erasing the fences and the road markers and turning the world into nothing but white static. Rowan kept walking anyway because stopping meant dying, and dying meant losing, and she'd lost enough already. Then she saw it. A light. Warm and golden and impossibly distant. A porch light cutting through the storm like a lighthouse beam through fog. Her body moved towards it before her mind could catch up. One step, another, another. She didn't remember climbing the porch steps. Didn't remember her hands hitting the wooden boards. Didn't remember falling, just the cold. Then nothing. Inside the ranch house, 10-year-old Clara Mercer looked up from the kitchen table where she'd been pretending to do arithmetic homework while actually drawing horses in the margins of her notebook. "Papa," she said quietly. Her father didn't respond. He was staring at the ledger spread across the table in front of him, like it contained answers to questions he hadn't figured out how to ask yet. "Papa," Clara said again, louder this time. There's somebody outside." That got his attention. Elias Mercer's head came up fast. "What?" "On the porch. I heard something fall. Probably the wind knocking over the—" "No." Clara's voice had gone small and scared. "I think it's a person." Elias was already moving. At 38, he looked like the kind of man the frontier carved out of granite instead of growing from normal human stock. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hands that could gentle a spooked horse or break a fence post in half depending on what the situation required. He'd been handsome once, back before grief hollowed him out and left something harder in its place. He crossed the kitchen in 4 strides and yanked open the front door. Cold exploded into the house like a living thing, and there she was. A tiny figure collapsed across the porch boards, snow already starting to cover her like the valley was trying to bury the evidence. Elias was down the steps before he registered moving. He dropped to his knees beside her, turning her carefully onto her back. Her face was pale. Not just pale from cold, but pale like paper, like something that had been drained of color over time. Her lips were blue. Snow had frozen into strands of dark hair across her cheeks. He pressed 2 fingers against her throat. Pulse. Faint, but there. When he lifted her, she weighed almost nothing. That disturbed him more than the cold or the blue lips or the way her head lolled against his shoulder. People weren't supposed to feel this light. Even small people had substance, had weight, had presence. This girl felt like holding a bundle of sticks wrapped in fabric. Behind him, Clara stood in the doorway with both hands pressed against her mouth. Is she dead? No. Elias carried the girl up the steps. Not yet. He brought her inside and laid her on the sofa near the fireplace. Clara appeared beside him instantly with blankets. Too many blankets. The whole stack from the linen closet, because she was 10 and didn't know what else to do. Go get your sister, Elias said. Clara ran. Elias knelt beside the sofa and started checking for injuries. No blood that he could see, no obvious breaks, just cold and starvation and exhaustion that had finally caught up with her all at once. Footsteps on the stairs announced Nora before she appeared. 16 years old and already too serious, too careful, too used to being the only woman in a house full of grief. She'd grown tall over the past year, taller than their mother had been, though nobody mentioned that out loud. Dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, eyes that watched everything and revealed nothing. She took one look at the unconscious girl on their sofa and said, How long has she been outside? Don't know. Is she local? Don't think so. Should we get Doc Morrison? Elias hesitated. Doc Morrison lived 4 miles away, and the storm was getting worse. By the time they got him here, the girl would either wake up or she wouldn't. Not yet, he said. Let's get her warm first. They worked in silence. Nora brought dry clothes, her own, though they'd be too big. Clara hovered nearby, asking questions that nobody answered because nobody had answers yet. Elias built up the fire until heat filled the room like something solid. The girl didn't wake up, not for hours. Clara eventually fell asleep in the chair by the fire, head tilted at an angle that would give her a sore neck in the morning. Nora retreated upstairs after making Elias promise to call her if anything changed, and Elias stayed in the wooden chair across from the sofa, watching the stranger breathe. He should have felt more concerned about letting an unknown woman into his house with his daughters sleeping upstairs. He should have felt more suspicious about where she'd come from or why she'd been walking alone in a blizzard. But mostly, he just felt tired. Tired in the way that had nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with the past 18 months grinding him down into something he barely recognized. His wife had died a year and a half ago. Cancer. The kind that started quiet and spread fast. They'd known for 3 months before the end came, and those 3 months had been worse than the dying itself. Watching her fade. Watching the girls try not to cry where she could see them. Watching the medical bills pile up while the ranch accounts drained like water through a cracked bucket. After she died, everyone told him it would get better. It didn't. The grief didn't soften. It just changed shape. Became something he carried with him everywhere. In the hallways that echoed too loud. In the empty chair at dinner. In the way Clara sometimes looked at him like she was afraid he'd disappear too. He'd survived. That was supposed to be enough. But survival wasn't living, and somewhere in the past year he'd forgotten the difference. The girl on the sofa stirred around 2 in the morning, just a small movement, her hand twitching against the blanket. Then her eyes opened. For a long moment she just stared at the ceiling, not moving, not speaking. Then her gaze shifted sideways and found him sitting there. She didn't scream, didn't panic, just looked at him with dark eyes that had seen too much of the wrong things. You're safe, Elias said quietly. His voice came out rougher than he intended, gravelly from disuse. He didn't talk much these days. Didn't have much worth saying. The girl tried to sit up too fast. Dizziness hit her visibly. He watched her eyes lose focus, watched her sway. Easy, he said. She steadied herself with one hand pressed against the sofa cushion. I didn't mean to cause trouble. That struck him as a strange thing to say. Most people would have apologized for collapsing on someone's porch, or thanked him for bringing them inside, or asked where they were. She apologized for existing. What's your name? Elias asked. Rowan Vale. Where were you headed? She looked away. Anywhere that would have me. You got family around here? No. Friends? No. Anybody expecting you anywhere? No. The silence that followed felt heavier than it should have. Elias stood and crossed to the kitchen. He ladled stew from the pot on the stove, beef and potatoes and carrots that Clara had helped make 3 days ago, and they'd been eating ever since. He brought it back and set it on the small table beside the sofa. You hungry? Rowan looked at the bowl like it might be a trap. Yes, she whispered. She ate slowly at first, careful. like someone who'd learned the hard way that eating too fast after starving could make you sick. But within a minute, the carefulness gave way to desperation. She ate like someone who didn't know when food might happen again, hunched over the bowl protectively, one arm curved around it. Elias looked away to give her privacy. From the hallway came the sound of quiet footsteps. Nora appeared wearing a nightgown and a shawl, hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger like this, less like the girl who'd been holding the household together through sheer force of will, and more like the child she was supposed to be. She stood in the doorway watching Rowan eat. "She gonna stay?" Nora asked. "Just for tonight," Elias said. "Storm's too bad to send her back out." "And tomorrow?" "We'll figure it out tomorrow." But tomorrow came too fast, the way it always did. Dawn broke gray and cold over Black Hollow Valley. The storm had passed, but left 3 feet of fresh snow in its wake, turning the landscape into something clean and blank and impossible to navigate without snowshoes. The ranch looked smaller under all that white, more isolated, like the only thing left in the world. Rowan woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke. For one terrible second, she thought she'd died after all, that the warmth and safety were just her brain's final kindness before shutting down completely. Then Clara's voice cut through the fog. "She's awake!" The little girl bounded into the room with the kind of energy that only 10-year-olds possessed before coffee. She had dark curly hair that refused to stay in its braid, and brown eyes that looked at everything like the world was still surprising. "Are you okay? Do you need more blankets? Are you still cold? Papa made breakfast, but he's not good at eggs, so they're kind of weird. But there's bacon too, and—" "Clara," Nora appeared behind her sister. "Let her breathe." Clara deflated slightly, but didn't leave. Rowan pushed herself upright carefully, testing her body for damage. Everything hurt in the dull way that meant bruising rather than breaks. Her feet ached. Her head throbbed. But she was alive. That counted for something. Elias appeared in the doorway carrying a plate. Scrambled eggs that did indeed look weird. Too dry in some places and runny in others. Bacon that was slightly burned. Toast that was slightly raw. The breakfast of a man who'd learned to cook only out of necessity and never quite mastered the skill. He set the plate on the table without ceremony. "Eat." It wasn't a request. Rowan ate. Afterward, when her hands had stopped shaking and her vision had cleared completely, she looked at Elias directly for the first time. "Thank you for not letting me die on your porch." Seemed like the neighborly thing to do. Most neighbors would have left me there. Elias didn't argue because they both knew she was right. Rowan set down her fork carefully. "I can work. I'm not asking for charity. You look like a strong breeze could knock you over." "I'm stronger than I look." "That'd have to be true, or you'd already be dead." She almost smiled at that. Almost. "I can keep books, manage inventory, handle correspondence. I worked for a cattle operation in Wyoming before." She trailed off. "Before what?" "Before they decided they didn't need me anymore." The way she said it made it clear there was more to the story, but Elias didn't push. "You know anything about ranch operations?" he asked instead. "Enough." "Livestock accounting?" "Yes." "Supply management?" "Yes." "Contract negotiation?" "More than most people." Elias studied her. She was tiny. Probably didn't weigh more than 100 pounds soaking wet. Her face was gaunt. Her hands trembled slightly from residual cold and hunger. She looked like the kind of person who'd been beaten down so many times that getting back up had become automatic, a reflex rather than a choice. But her eyes were sharp, and he needed help. The ranch had been falling apart slowly since his wife died. Not dramatically. No catastrophic failures or dramatic collapses. Just entropy. Bills getting paid late. Inventory slipping. Records getting messier. The kind of slow decay that happened when the person holding everything together disappeared and nobody else knew how to pick up the pieces. He'd been managing, barely, but managing wasn't thriving. And his daughters deserved better than bare survival. 1 month, Elias said finally. Room and board, small wage, trial basis. Rowan's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. Relief, maybe. Or disbelief that felt like relief. 1 month is more than anyone else offered, she said quietly. What neither of them understood yet was that Black Hollow Valley had already started watching. Small frontier towns noticed everything, especially outsiders, especially women. Especially women who didn't fit into the narrow spaces where people thought women belonged. By the time the sun reached its peak that afternoon, 3 separate people had ridden past the Mercer Ranch slowly enough to get a good look at the unfamiliar figure moving around inside the barn. By dinner, the whispers had started. At the general store, Margaret Hendricks leaned across the counter towards Sarah Chen and said, "Did you hear Elias Mercer took in some drifter woman? I heard she collapsed on his porch half dead." Convenient, isn't it? Pretty young thing showing up helpless right at the widower's door. She doesn't look that young, or that pretty. Young enough. Pretty enough. At the church social hall, Evelyn Cross set down her teacup with enough force to rattle the saucer. "It's inappropriate," she said. The 4 women seated around her nodded agreement because disagreeing with Evelyn Cross was dangerous. Evelyn was 63 years old and had spent 4 decades perfecting the art of community leadership, which mostly meant deciding who belonged and who didn't. She wore her authority like armor: starched dresses, steel gray hair pulled back tight enough to hurt, a voice that could freeze water. "He has daughters in that house," Evelyn continued, "young, impressionable daughters. And now there's some strange woman living under their roof?" "Maybe she's just helping out," ventured Ruth Morrison, whose husband was the town doctor and therefore afforded slightly more leeway to express opinions. Evelyn's gaze could have cut glass. "Helping with what, exactly?" "We all know Elias Mercer's been managing that ranch alone since Catherine died. He doesn't need help. He needs to set a proper example." The unspoken message was clear. Rowan Vale represented disorder in a place that demanded order to survive, and Evelyn Cross intended to restore that order, whatever it took. Back at the ranch, Rowan spent the afternoon examining the financial records Elias had dumped on the kitchen table with something like relief. Numbers made sense. Numbers didn't judge or whisper or look at you like you were a problem that needed solving. Numbers were clean, honest. They either added up or they didn't. These numbers didn't add up, not even close. She spread ledgers across the table, cross-referencing dates and amounts, tracking payments and purchases back through 18 months of increasingly chaotic record-keeping. Nora wandered in around 3 o'clock, ostensibly to get a glass of water, but really to watch what this strange woman was doing with her family's private business. "You find something wrong?" Nora asked. Rowan looked up. "Define wrong." "I don't know. You've been staring at those books for 2 hours like they personally offended you." "They kind of did." Rowan turned one of the ledgers around so Nora could see. "This entry says you purchased 300 pounds of feed on August 14th. Okay. But this invoice from the feed store shows only 200 pounds delivered. Maybe Papa made a mistake writing it down." "Maybe. Except it happens 14 times across different purchases. Always the same discrepancy. Always exactly 100 pounds or $100 or 100 something. Nora frowned. "That seems deliberate." "Yes." "You think someone's stealing from us?" "I think someone's been manipulating your accounts. The question is who and why." Before Nora could respond, Clara burst into the kitchen with the energy of a small tornado. "Rowan, do you like horses? Because we have horses, 5 of them. Well, 4.5 because Juniper is really old and mostly just stands in the barn looking judgmental. But the others are really nice and I could show you if you want to see them. And—" "Clara," Nora said, "breathe." But Rowan was already standing, setting down her pencil with a small smile that transformed her entire face. "I'd love to see your horses," she said. And just like that, Clara had a new best friend. They spent the next hour in the barn while Clara narrated the complete history and personality of each horse in exhaustive detail. Rowan listened like it was the most fascinating information she'd ever received. She asked questions, made observations, let Clara teach her things about horse care that she probably already knew. From the barn doorway, Elias watched them. He'd come to check on the livestock and found his youngest daughter chattering away to a woman who'd been a stranger 24 hours ago. Clara was laughing. Actually laughing, the sound bright and genuine in a way he hadn't heard in months. Something in his chest tightened. He'd forgotten his daughters could sound like that. That evening, Rowan insisted on cooking dinner. Elias protested. She'd just recovered from near death. She should rest. But she waved him off and set to work with the kind of efficient competence that suggested she'd cooked in worse conditions with fewer resources. Dinner appeared 40 minutes later. Real dinner. Not bachelor scrambled eggs or Clara's well-meaning but inedible attempts at casserole. Actual food that tasted like someone had put thought and care into its preparation. They ate together at the kitchen table. Clara talked non-stop about horses and school and the neighbor's cat that kept stealing their chickens. Nora stayed quieter, watching Rowan with cautious curiosity. Elias didn't say much because he rarely did, but the silence between bites felt different than the heavy, suffocating quiet that usually filled the house. This silence felt almost comfortable, like the spaces between words mattered less than the fact that they were all sitting together. After dinner, while the girls cleared dishes, Rowan returned to the ledgers. Elias found her still working past midnight, surrounded by papers covered in her small, precise handwriting. "You should sleep," he said. "Almost done." "It's been 14 hours. I work better at night." She didn't look up. Quieter, fewer distractions. Elias pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "Find anything?" Rowan set down her pencil slowly. "You're missing approximately $4,000, she said. The number hit him like a physical blow. 4,000, over 18 months, small amounts scattered across multiple accounts and purchases, designed to look like clerical errors or market fluctuations. She slid 3 ledgers toward him. "But it's not random. Someone's been systematically siphoning money from your operation." Elias stared at the numbers, his jaw tight. "Who?" "That's harder to trace. The manipulation is sophisticated. Whoever did this understood ranch accounting well enough to hide the theft in normal operational expenses." She paused. "But there's one name that appears consistently in connection with the discrepancies." "Who?" "Gideon Voss." Elias went very still. Gideon Voss, land broker, businessman, one of the wealthiest men in the territory. He'd been the one who helped Catherine manage the ranch finances during her final illness, when Elias had been too consumed with watching his wife die to pay attention to paperwork. He'd been kind about it, understanding, told Elias not to worry, that he'd make sure everything was handled properly. And apparently he'd handled it by stealing $4,000. "No," Elias said flatly. "I know it's hard to—" "No." His voice was hard. "Gideon was Catherine's friend. He helped us when—" "I understand this is difficult," Rowan interrupted gently. "But the evidence is clear. These signatures here," she pointed to several documents, "were altered. The dates don't match other records. And this land transfer agreement that supposedly gives Voss first right of refusal on your northern acreage, your wife couldn't have signed it." "Why not?" "Because it's dated 3 weeks after she died." The silence that followed felt like falling. Elias reached for the document with hands that shook slightly. He stared at his dead wife's signature. Perfect, precise, unmistakably hers. Except impossible. "He forged it," Elias said slowly. "Yes. He used her illness, used her trust, used—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Rowan stayed quiet, letting him process. Finally, Elias looked up at her with eyes that had gone cold and dangerous. "If we expose this," he said carefully, "what happens?" Rowan met his gaze steadily. "He'll come after us. Men like Voss don't stay powerful by letting people challenge them publicly. He'll use every resource he has to discredit the evidence and destroy whoever brought it forward. You." "Yes." "Why would he target you specifically?" "Because I'm the easiest target." Her voice stayed level, matter of fact. "I'm an outsider. No family. No history here. No credibility. He'll say I manipulated you, that I'm trying to defraud the ranch, that I fabricated evidence for—" She gestured vaguely. "Whatever reason fits his narrative. And people will believe him? People always believe the powerful man over the inconvenient woman." She said it without bitterness, just tired recognition. "Especially when the woman in question showed up out of nowhere and immediately started making accusations." Elias pushed back from the table and stood, pacing to the window. Outside, snow gleamed under moonlight. Everything looked peaceful, clean, safe. All lies. "We could ignore it," he said quietly. "Write off the losses. Move forward." "You could." But he won't stop. Men like Voss see hesitation as permission. If you don't challenge him now, he'll take more. And more. Until there's nothing left to take. Elias knew she was right. He also knew what fighting would cost. Not just the money or the time or the public battle. It would cost this fragile, frightening thing that had started growing in his house over the past 24 hours. the sound of Clara laughing, the sight of Nora relaxing slightly, the feeling of his home becoming something other than a mausoleum. If they went to war with Gideon Voss, the man would destroy Rowan. And without Rowan, he didn't finish the thought. "I need to think," he said finally. Rowan nodded. Of course. But 3 days later, the choice was made for them. Because Evelyn Cross arrived at the ranch with 5 other women, and none of them were there to welcome the new neighbor. They came on a Tuesday morning when the sky was the color of old dishwater. Rowan saw them first through the kitchen window, 6 women climbing out of 2 carriages like a delegation arriving to deliver a verdict. They moved with the kind of coordinated purpose that suggested this wasn't a social call. She recognized the formation immediately. She'd seen it before, in other towns, other lives. Women who'd decided someone didn't belong, gathering their numbers before delivering the message. Safety in groups, righteousness in plurality. "Elias," she said quietly. He looked up from the fence post he'd been examining at the kitchen table, a piece of wood so rotted it crumbled when he touched it. "What?" "You have visitors." The knock came hard and formal. Elias opened the door. Evelyn Cross stood at the front of the group like a general addressing enemy territory. She wore black. She always wore black, had since her husband died 12 years ago, as if mourning had become her permanent identity. The other women flanked her in a tight formation: Margaret Hendricks, Sarah Chen, Ruth Morrison, 2 others whose names Rowan didn't know but whose expressions she recognized perfectly. Judgment wrapped in concern. "Elias," Evelyn said. Not a greeting, a statement. "Mrs. Cross? We need to speak with you, privately." "About?" Evelyn's gaze shifted past him to where Rowan stood near the kitchen table, one hand still holding the ledger she'd been reviewing. The look lasted exactly 2 seconds but contained volumes. "About the situation you've created here," Evelyn said. Elias didn't move from the doorway. "What situation?" "May we come inside?" It wasn't really a question. Elias stepped back. The women entered like an occupying force, spreading out across the front room with practiced efficiency. They didn't sit. Standing made the visit official, temporary, not a social occasion. Rowan stayed exactly where she was. She'd learned years ago that running made things worse. People saw flight as admission of guilt. Better to stand still and let whatever was coming hit you straight on. Evelyn positioned herself at the center of the room. "Elias, we've come as friends, as members of this community who care about you and your family." "Appreciate that," Elias said carefully. "Then you'll understand our concern." Evelyn's voice carried the kind of practiced sympathy that barely concealed the steel underneath. "You're a widower with 2 daughters, young, impressionable daughters who need proper guidance and appropriate influences in their lives. They're doing fine, are they?" Margaret Hendricks spoke up. "Because Nora looked exhausted at the store yesterday, and Clara's been distracted in school." "Clara's 10. She's always distracted." "Nevertheless," Evelyn continued, "the situation you've created here is inappropriate. An unmarried woman living under your roof, no chaperone, no propriety. Do you understand how this looks?" Rowan felt the familiar tightness starting in her chest. Here it came. The thing she'd been waiting for since the moment Elias had offered her work. The inevitable moment when the world reminded her that women like her didn't get to have things like safety, or kindness, or belonging. Elias's voice came out dangerously quiet. "How what looks?" "A strange woman living in your house," Sarah Chen said, her tone suggesting the answer should be obvious. "Without proper supervision." "She's my employee." "She's sharing your home," Evelyn corrected. "Eating at your table, sleeping under your roof, and you're a man alone with 2 daughters who need—" "Need what?" Elias interrupted. "Need to see their father making good decisions, hiring competent help, running this ranch properly for the first time in 18 months? They need," Evelyn said sharply, "to see their father maintaining appropriate boundaries, setting proper examples, not taking in stray women of questionable character." The silence that followed felt explosive. Rowan's hands had gone numb. Questionable character. She'd heard variations of that phrase her entire life. Different words, same message. You don't fit. You don't belong. You're not the right kind of person. What exactly, Elias said very slowly. Are you implying about Miss Vale's character? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Evelyn counted them off on her fingers. She appeared out of nowhere. No family, no references, no history anyone can verify. She collapsed on your porch in what some might call convenient circumstances. She nearly died. And now she's embedded herself in your household while handling your private financial affairs. Forgive me, Elias, but that raises questions. Questions about what? Ruth Morrison stepped forward, her voice gentler than the others, but no less insistent. About her intentions. About why a woman with her supposed skills would be wandering alone in a blizzard instead of maintaining steady employment somewhere respectable. Maybe, Rowan said quietly. Respectable places don't always want women like me. All eyes turned to her. She hadn't planned to speak, knew better than to engage, knew it would only make things worse. But the words came out anyway, pushed by 18 years of swallowing this exact conversation. Women like you, Evelyn repeated. And what kind of woman is that? The kind who doesn't have a husband to make her acceptable. The kind who works instead of marries. The kind who shows up destitute and latches on to the first vulnerable man she finds. Margaret Hendricks's voice cut sharp. The kind who uses a widower's grief and his daughter's need for mothering to secure herself a comfortable position. That's enough, Elias said. But Margaret wasn't finished. We've all heard about women like her. Drifters who prey on lonely men, who manipulate their way into homes and bank accounts, and I said enough. Elias's voice didn't rise, but something in it made everyone stop talking. You came into my home. You questioned my judgment. You insulted my employee. Now you're leaving. Evelyn drew herself up taller. We came here out of concern. You came here to run someone out of town because she doesn't fit your idea of proper. Elias moved toward the door and opened it. But this is my house, my family, my decision, and I'm asking you to leave. Now. Nobody moved. The standoff lasted maybe 10 seconds, but felt longer. Finally, Evelyn turned to Rowan directly. You should go, she said. Not angry, almost kind. For your own sake as much as theirs, this valley isn't kind to women who don't know their place. And what place, Rowan asked, would that be? Somewhere you're wanted, somewhere you belong. Evelyn's expression softened into something that might have been genuine concern. You seem like an intelligent woman. Surely you understand that your presence here is causing harm. The girls are being talked about at school. Elias is being questioned by his neighbors. Every day you stay makes it worse. For who? For everyone. Rowan looked at the other women, saw the certainty in their faces, the absolute conviction that they were doing the right thing, protecting the community, maintaining standards. She'd seen that expression before too. People convinced their cruelty was kindness. If I leave, Rowan said slowly, the talk stops? It should, Ruth Morrison said. People are reasonable. They just need assurance that propriety is being maintained. And the girls, Nora and Clara, they'll be left alone? Of course, Evelyn said. This isn't about them. It's about preserving their reputations, their futures. Surely you can see that. Rowan could see it, could see exactly how this worked. Drive away the inconvenient woman and everything goes back to normal. The threat gets neutralized, order gets restored, and everyone convinces themselves they did it for good reasons. For one terrible moment, she actually considered it, considered packing her few belongings and disappearing into the next storm. It would be easier, safer, less painful than staying somewhere she wasn't wanted, watching people who'd shown her kindness get punished for it. She'd done it before, could do it again. But then Clara's voice came from the staircase. Don't go. Everyone turned. The little girl stood halfway down the stairs in her nightgown, hair wild from sleep, eyes red from crying. She must have been listening from upstairs, must have heard everything. Clara, Nora appeared behind her sister, one hand on the younger girl's shoulder. Go back to... No. Clara shook off her sister's hand and descended the rest of the stairs. She stopped a few feet from the group of women, small and defiant and trembling. You can't make her leave. Sweetheart, Evelyn's voice gentled. We're trying to help. You're not helping. You're being mean. Clara's voice shook, but stayed loud. Rowan's been nicer to us than anyone since Mama died. She fixed our accounts. She makes real food. She listens when I talk about horses, and she doesn't tell me to be quiet or go play somewhere else. Clarice, Elias started, but Clara wasn't done. You all came to Mama's funeral, she said, looking directly at Evelyn. You said you'd help us. You said we wouldn't be alone, but then you left. All of you. You stopped visiting, stopped bringing food, stopped asking if we were okay. Tears streamed down her face now, but her voice stayed steady. Rowan's been here 3 days, and she's done more for us than any of you did in 18 months. So if she's bad for us, what does that make you? The silence felt like a physical weight. Sarah Chen looked away first, then Ruth Morrison. Even Margaret Hendricks had the grace to appear uncomfortable. Only Evelyn held her ground. A child, she said carefully, cannot understand the complexities of, I understand you want to take away the only person who makes my papa smile, Clara interrupted. I understand you want to make my sister stop looking less sad. I understand you think following rules is more important than people being happy. She wiped her eyes roughly with her sleeve. Mama would have hated you for this, she said. That landed like a slap. Evelyn's face went white. Your mother understood the importance of family, Nora said quietly. Everyone looked at her. The 16-year-old had descended the stairs silently and now stood beside her younger sister. Where Clara burned hot with defiant anger, Nora's rage came cold and controlled. Mama understood family, Nora repeated. She understood that sometimes people who don't fit the mold are exactly the people you need. She understood that rules matter less than kindness, and she definitely understood the difference between help and harm. She looked at each woman in turn. You're harming us, Nora said flatly. You're telling my father he's wrong for making a decision that's actually working. You're telling Clara and me that we should be ashamed of someone who's been nothing but good to us. You're making us choose between someone who actually helps and people who just want to judge. That's not fair, Ruth Morrison protested weakly. Isn't it? Nora's voice stayed level. You came here to run Rowan off, not because she's done anything wrong, not because she's harmed anyone, but because she doesn't fit your idea of how women should be, because she showed up alone and that makes her suspect, because she's good at things women aren't supposed to be good at. She stepped closer to her father. Well, I'm going to be good at things too. I'm going to school, going to study law, going to help people who can't help themselves. And if that makes me improper or suspect or wrong, then I guess I'll just have to live with disappointing you. Evelyn's jaw tightened. You're being influenced by someone who treats me like I have a brain, Nora interrupted. By someone who asks what I think instead of telling me what I should think. By someone who's been here less than a week and already sees me more clearly than people who've known me my whole life. She moved to stand beside Rowan. A deliberate choice. A visible alliance. So if you want her to leave, Nora said, you'll have to go through both of us. Clara immediately moved to Rowan's other side. The three of them stood there. The outsider woman, the angry teenager, the defiant child, facing down 6 established pillars of the community. Elias watched his daughters choose their ground, watched them stand up for something they believed in despite the cost, watched them become exactly the kind of women their mother would have been proud of. He moved to join them. The 4 of them stood together, a family that didn't look like what families were supposed to look like, but felt more complete than it had in 18 months. Evelyn Cross looked at them for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its veneer of concern and revealed the steel underneath. You're making a mistake, she said to Elias. Maybe. The community will not support this. That's their choice. Your business will suffer. Your daughters' reputations will be fine, Elias interrupted, because they're good people making good choices. And if this valley can't see that, then maybe this valley's the one with the problem. Evelyn's eyes went cold. You're choosing her over your standing in this community. I'm choosing what's right over what's convenient. Very noble. Evelyn's smile didn't reach her eyes. I hope you still feel that way when the consequences arrive. She turned and walked toward the door. The other women followed, none of them making eye contact. At the threshold, Evelyn paused and looked back at Rowan. I was trying to help you, she said. Remember that when this all falls apart? Then they were gone. The door closed behind them with a sound like a judgment being sealed. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Clara started crying for real. Not the angry tears from before, but the shaky, relieved kind that came after standing up to something terrifying and surviving it. Rowan knelt and pulled the girl into a hug. Clara buried her face in Rowan's shoulder and sobbed. "I thought they were going to make you leave," she whispered. "They tried." "Are you going to?" "Leave, I mean." Rowan looked up at Elias. He was watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not quite grateful, not quite relieved. Something more complicated, something that acknowledged the weight of what had just happened and what it would cost. "No," Rowan said quietly. "I'm not leaving." "Promise?" "I promise." It was a reckless promise, a dangerous one. She had no idea if she could keep it, had no way of knowing what was coming or whether she'd survive it. But Clara needed to hear it, so she said it anyway. That night, after the girls finally went to bed, Elias found Rowan sitting on the porch steps staring out at the dark valley. He sat down beside her without asking. "That was stupid," he said. "Which part?" "All of it? Standing up to Evelyn Cross, making enemies of half the valley, promising Clara you'd stay." "Probably. Definitely." He was quiet for a moment. "But thank you." Rowan glanced at him. "For what?" "For not running. Most people would have. I've run from enough things. Gets tiring after a while." "Still, you could have made it easier on yourself." "Could have?" She looked back at the darkness. "But your daughters were braver than I was. Couldn't exactly leave after that." Elias made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Nora's been angry for months. First time she's channeled it at something that deserves it." "And Clara? Clara's got her mother's spine. I forget that sometimes because she's small and happy most of the time. But Catherine had that same core. Sweet until you pushed her too far, then suddenly you're dealing with a hurricane." "Sounds like a good person to have been married to." "She was." The silence that followed felt different than earlier ones, less heavy, more companionable. "They're going to come after us harder now," Rowan said eventually. "I know. Evelyn Cross isn't the type to let this go. She'll make things difficult." "Let her try." "Elias," Rowan turned to face him fully, "I need you to understand what you're risking here, not just social standing or business relationships. If we go after Gideon Voss with the fraud evidence, if we make this public, you'll be fighting on two fronts. The community will already be hostile because of me. Adding accusations against one of the territory's wealthiest men. I don't care. You should care. You have daughters who just stood up for you," Elias interrupted, "who put themselves between you and a mob because they believed it was right. You think I'm going to reward that by backing down? By teaching them that doing the right thing only matters when it's convenient? I think you should protect them. I am protecting them. I'm protecting them from learning that power gets to cheat just because it's power. I'm protecting them from becoming the kind of people who look away when someone's being hurt because fighting back is uncomfortable." He stood and looked down at her. Catherine spent her last coherent days signing papers she thought would protect this ranch, protect our girls' futures, and Gideon Voss used that trust to rob us blind. You think I'm going to let that stand? You think I'm going to tell my daughters that their mother's final act was meaningless because challenging the man who violated it would be inconvenient? "No," Rowan said quietly. "I don't think you're going to do that." "Damn right I'm not." He went back inside. Rowan sat alone on the porch for another hour, watching the stars come out over the valley. She should have been afraid. Should have been calculating exit strategies and backup plans, but instead she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. The next morning, Rowan and Elias started building their case in earnest. They worked methodically, cross-referencing every document, photographing every altered signature, tracking every suspicious transaction back to its source. Rowan's background in accounting became invaluable. She knew what questions to ask, what evidence would hold up under scrutiny, what patterns suggested intentional fraud versus honest mistakes. By the third day, they had enough material to fill a leather case, enough to destroy Gideon Voss completely, but enough also meant dangerous. Rowan woke on the fourth morning to find Elias already up, sitting at the kitchen table cleaning his rifle. "Expecting trouble?" she asked. "Preparing for it." He didn't look up from the weapon. "Went into town yesterday for supplies. Heard some things." What kind of things? The kind where people stop talking when I walk into the store. The kind where the banker suddenly can't meet with me. The kind where men I've known 20 years cross the street to avoid conversation. Evelyn's been busy. Not just Evelyn. Elias set down the cleaning rod. Heard Gideon Voss has been asking questions about you. Where you came from. Who you worked for before. Whether you have any criminal history. Rowan's stomach tightened. And he's spreading rumors, nothing specific enough to be called slander, just implications. Questions about why a woman with your supposed credentials would be unemployed and desperate. Suggestions that maybe you're running from something. I'm not. I know. But he doesn't care about truth. He cares about creating enough doubt that when we go public with the fraud evidence, people will question your credibility. Rowan sat down across from him. It's working already, isn't it? Some people. Not everyone. Elias finally looked at her. But yeah, it's working. Maybe we should... Don't. His voice was firm. Don't even think about backing down now. We're too far in, and backing down doesn't make you safer. It just proves his strategy works. He was right. She knew he was right, but knowing it didn't stop the cold fear spreading through her chest. That afternoon, while Rowan was helping Clara with arithmetic homework, a man arrived at the ranch. Not threatening, not aggressive, just official. He introduced himself as Thomas Garrett, attorney for Gideon Voss. Elias met him at the door and didn't invite him inside. What do you want? Elias asked. Garrett smiled the kind of smile lawyers learned in school. Professional, empty. Just to deliver a message, Mr. Voss is aware of certain allegations being prepared against him. Allegations involving financial impropriety. Not allegations. Facts. Accusations, then. Garrett's smile never wavered. Mr. Voss wants you to know that he bears you no ill will, Mr. Mercer. He understands you've been under significant stress since your wife's passing, that you may have been influenced by outside parties with questionable motives. Meaning? Meaning he's prepared to be generous. He's willing to forgive any debts you believe are in dispute, willing to renegotiate the terms of your land agreements, willing to part as friends and business partners. In exchange for dropping this matter entirely and, Garrett glanced past Elias toward where Rowan stood in the hallway, reconsidering your current household arrangements. The silence stretched thin and dangerous. Tell Gideon Voss, Elias said very quietly, to go to hell. Garrett's smile finally faded. That's unfortunate. Mr. Voss was hoping to resolve this amicably. Nothing amicable about trying to buy my silence. Not silence, peace. There's a difference. Garrett straightened his coat. Mr. Voss also wanted me to remind you that legal proceedings can be expensive, time-consuming, damaging to one's reputation, particularly when the primary witness is, he paused delicately, a woman of uncertain background making serious accusations against a respected businessman. Get off my property. Of course. Garrett turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. Mr. Voss asked me to mention that he's been made aware of certain irregularities in your ranch's tax filings over the past 3 years. Probably innocent mistakes, but mistakes nonetheless that could warrant investigation. Wouldn't want those to become public during an already contentious situation. Elias went very still. Are you threatening me? Informing you. There's a difference. Garrett tipped his hat. Good day, Mr. Mercer. I hope you'll reconsider before this becomes unnecessarily unpleasant for everyone involved. He walked away. Elias watched until the man's horse disappeared down the road. Then he turned to Rowan. He's bluffing, she said immediately. The tax filings are fine. I checked them. Doesn't matter if he's bluffing. Matters that he can make it look real long enough to cause damage. So what do we do? Elias closed the door and leaned against it. For the first time since Rowan had known him, he looked genuinely worried. We move faster than he does, he said finally. We take this to the county prosecutor before Voss can build enough momentum to stop us. When? Tomorrow. There's a town meeting tomorrow night. The prosecutor will be there. Half the county will be there. He met her eyes. We go public. All at once. Don't give him time to prepare a defense. That's risky. Everything's risky at this point. At least this way we control the timing. Rowan nodded slowly. Okay, tomorrow. But tomorrow felt very close, and the weight of what they were about to do felt impossibly heavy. That night, Nora found Rowan sitting alone in the kitchen long after everyone else had gone to bed. "Can't sleep?" Nora asked. "Too much thinking." The teenager sat down across from her. "About tomorrow?" "Among other things." "You scared?" Rowan considered lying, decided against it. "Terrified." "Good. Would be weird if you weren't." Nora poured herself a glass of water. "Papa's scared too. Won't admit it, but I can tell." "How?" "He keeps checking the windows, making sure doors are locked. Cleaned his rifle this morning, even though it didn't need cleaning." She took a sip. "That's what he does when he's worried. Gets focused on small tasks he can control because the big stuff feels too overwhelming." Rowan smiled slightly. "You're very observant." "Had to be. After Mama died, somebody needed to pay attention. Make sure Clara was okay. Make sure Papa didn't completely fall apart." Nora set down her glass. "That's why I'm glad you're here." "Yeah?" "Yeah, because for the first time in 18 months, I feel like I can stop watching everyone all the time, like maybe someone else can share the weight." She looked at Rowan directly. "So don't leave. Whatever happens tomorrow. Whatever Gideon Voss does, or Evelyn Cross says, or the town thinks, don't leave." "I won't." "Promise?" "I already promised Clara." "Promise me too." Rowan reached across the table and squeezed Nora's hand. "I promise." They sat together in comfortable silence until the candle burned low and sleep finally seemed possible. Tomorrow was coming. Ready or not. The morning of the town meeting arrived cold and clear. Rowan woke before dawn with her stomach in knots. She lay in the small bedroom off the kitchen, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak and settle around her. Somewhere upstairs, Clara was snoring softly. A floorboard groaned as Elias moved around in his room. The sounds of a household waking up to face something none of them were truly prepared for. She dressed carefully in the one decent dress she owned. Dark blue cotton, mended at the hem but clean and pressed. It wasn't much, but it was respectable. Or as respectable as she was going to manage. When she came into the kitchen, Elias was already there with coffee brewed and eggs scrambling in the pan. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. His eyes were shadowed, his movements too precise, like he was thinking 3 steps ahead of every action. "You didn't have to cook," Rowan said. "Needed something to do with my hands." He slid eggs onto 2 plates. "Couldn't just sit around waiting." They ate in silence. The food tasted like sawdust in Rowan's mouth, but she forced it down anyway. Couldn't afford to be lightheaded during what was coming. Needed every bit of strength she could scrape together. Clara appeared in her nightgown, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Is it today?" "Yeah," Elias said. "It's today." "Are you going to be okay?" "We'll be fine." Clara looked at him with the kind of skepticism only children could manage. "You're lying." "Maybe a little." "Papa?" He set down his fork and pulled her into a hug. "We're going to tell the truth. That's all we can do. Sometimes the truth is enough." "And when it's not?" "Then we figure out what comes next." Clara buried her face in his shirt. "I don't want them to be mean to Rowan." "Me neither, sweetheart. Me neither." By mid-morning, the entire valley knew something was happening. Word had spread through the careful networks that small towns maintained. The post office clerk mentioning to the grocer that Elias Mercer had requested a formal audience at the town meeting. The grocer mentioning to his customers that it involved financial irregularities. The customers mentioning to everyone they knew that this had something to do with Gideon Voss. By noon, people were arriving in Black Hollow from outlying farms and ranches. By 2 o'clock, the community hall was already half full, even though the meeting wasn't scheduled until 7. Rowan watched through the ranch house window as wagons and horses moved along the distant road toward town. A steady stream of people gathering to witness something. Maybe justice. Maybe a spectacle. Probably both. "Second thoughts?" Nora asked from behind her. Rowan turned. The girl stood in the doorway wearing her Sunday dress, hair braided neatly, expression calm in that too-old way she had. "Third and fourth thoughts too," Rowan admitted. "But you're still going." "Yeah." "Good." Nora came to stand beside her at the window. "Because we're going with you." "Nora, don't. We already talked about it. Me and Clara, we're coming. We're sitting in the front row. And if anyone tries to say something awful, we're going to stare at them until they feel ashamed." Despite everything, Rowan smiled. "That your whole plan?" "It's worked before." Nora glanced at her. "Besides, You stood up for us. Now we stand up for you. That's how this works. That's how it should work. Doesn't mean it always does. Then I guess we find out which kind of people live in Black Hollow Valley. They arrived at the community hall just after 6. The building was already packed, bodies crammed into every available space like they were afraid of missing something important. The air smelled like wet wool and wood smoke and nervous sweat. Conversations died as Elias pushed through the crowd with Rowan behind him and the girls flanking them like guards. Rowan felt every eye in the room tracking her movement, judging her dress, her posture, her presence, deciding whether she looked like someone credible or someone desperate. They took seats in the 3rd row, close enough to be seen clearly, but not so close it looked like they were seeking attention. Elias had thought through the positioning carefully. Everything about tonight had to be calculated. Gideon Voss arrived at 6:30. He made an entrance the way powerful men did, not rushed, not anxious, just present with absolute confidence. Tall and handsome in that weathered frontier way, silver threaded through dark hair, expensive suit that somehow didn't look out of place despite the rural setting. He moved through the crowd, shaking hands, clasping shoulders, laughing at jokes Rowan couldn't hear. He looked like someone who belonged, like someone people trusted. When his gaze found Rowan across the room, his expression didn't change, just a slight acknowledgement, a tiny smile that said he knew exactly what was coming and wasn't worried. That scared her more than anger would have. County Prosecutor James Halloran called the meeting to order at 7 sharp. He was a thin man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and the exhausted demeanor of someone who'd spent decades trying to maintain order in a place that resisted it. He banged a gavel against the podium and waited for the noise to die down. "We've got a full agenda tonight," he said. "Road repairs, water rights disputes, the usual business. But I understand Elias Mercer has requested time to address the assembly on a matter of some urgency." "That's right," Elias said, standing. "What's the nature of this matter?" "Fraud, land theft, forgery," Elias's voice carried across the hall. "Crimes committed against my family and potentially others in this valley." The room erupted. Halloran banged the gavel repeatedly until quiet returned. "Those are serious accusations, Mr. Mercer. You prepared to substantiate them?" "I am." "And who exactly are you accusing?" Elias turned and looked directly at Gideon Voss. "Him." The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning struck. Voss stood slowly, his expression shifting from pleasant to concerned. "James, I don't know what Elias thinks he's discovered, but I assure you, you'll have a chance to respond," Halloran interrupted. "Mr. Mercer, you have the floor." Elias walked to the front of the hall. Rowan's heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was it. No going back now. Elias laid out the case with brutal efficiency. He started with the timeline, his wife's illness, the confusion and chaos of those final months, the way Gideon Voss had stepped in offering help, offering to manage the ranch finances while Elias focused on Catherine's care. "I trusted him," Elias said. "My wife trusted him. We thought he was being neighborly, being kind." Then he detailed the discrepancies. $4,000 missing across 18 months, small amounts scattered through different accounts, numbers that didn't match invoices, dates that didn't align, signatures that appeared on documents after his wife had died. "At first we thought it was just poor record keeping," Elias said. "Mistakes made during a difficult time, but the pattern was too consistent, too deliberate." He signaled to Rowan. She stood, legs unsteady, and brought the leather case forward. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it and began removing documents. Ledgers, contracts, bank statements, land agreements, all marked with small colored tabs where the evidence appeared. "Miss Vale," Halloran said, "you're prepared to testify to these findings?" "Yes, sir." "And you are?" "Rowan Vale. I've been working as Mr. Mercer's bookkeeper for the past 2 weeks. A murmur ran through the crowd. 2 weeks. This outsider woman had been here 2 weeks, and now she was making accusations against one of the territory's most respected businessmen. Voss stood again. "James, this is absurd. A woman nobody knows appears out of nowhere and suddenly claims to have discovered fraud that nobody else has noticed in 18 months? Does that sound credible to you? It sounds like someone finally looked at the books properly, Rowan said before she could stop herself. Every head swiveled toward her. Halloran raised an eyebrow. You have relevant experience in this area, Miss Vale? Yes, sir. I worked cattle operations in Wyoming, managed accounts for 3 different ranches over 6 years. And why did you leave Wyoming? The question landed like a trap. Rowan felt Voss watching her, waiting to see how she'd answer. The ranch sold, she said carefully. New owners brought their own staff. It was true enough. What she didn't mention was that the new owners had been Gideon Voss's business partners, that they'd offered her a position if she'd be willing to adjust certain records to make the acquisition look more favorable, that she'd refused and found herself unemployed within a week. She didn't mention it because she couldn't prove it, and unproven accusations would only make her look desperate. Halloran gestured for her to continue. Rowan walked through the evidence methodically. She showed where invoice amounts had been altered, demonstrated how signatures had been forged by overlaying documents, and pointing out inconsistencies in pen pressure and letter formation. Traced money leaving the Mercer accounts and appearing in subsidiary holdings that all traced back to companies Voss controlled. The room stayed quiet. People were listening. Actually, listening. Then she reached the land transfer agreement. The one dated 3 weeks after Catherine Mercer died. She held it up so the entire hall could see. This document claims to give Mr. Voss first right of refusal on the Mercer Ranch's northern acreage, Rowan said. It's signed by Catherine Mercer, witnessed by Thomas Garrett, Mr. Voss's attorney, and dated February 19th. She paused. Catherine Mercer died on January 27th. The silence became absolute. Elias stood. My wife couldn't have signed that document. She was dead. Unless you're mistaken about the date, Voss said smoothly. Grief does strange things to memory, Elias. Perhaps I'm not mistaken. Elias's voice was flat. I know when my wife died. I was holding her hand when it happened, and that signature is a forgery. That's a serious charge. It's a serious crime. Halloran examined the document carefully, holding it up to the light, comparing it to other samples of Catherine Mercer's signature. Finally, he set it down and removed his glasses. Mr. Voss, he said slowly, you have any explanation for this? Voss spread his hands in a gesture of helpless confusion. I have no idea how that date error occurred. Clearly, there's been some mistake in the filing. Perhaps my attorney can clarify. Your attorney witnessed it, Rowan interrupted. His signature is right there beside hers, which means either he witnessed a dead woman signing a document or he knowingly participated in forgery. Or, Voss said, his voice hardening slightly, a desperate woman with questionable credentials is manipulating documents to create the appearance of wrongdoing. Tell me, Miss Vale, how long did it take you to alter these dates? How many of these papers did you falsify yourself? I didn't. You show up destitute, insert yourself into a grieving household, gain access to private financial records, and now you're making wild accusations against me? Voss looked around the room. Does anyone else find this timing convenient? Margaret Hendricks spoke up from the crowd. She did appear awfully suddenly. Right before all these supposed discrepancies were discovered, Sarah Chen added. Almost like she needed to create a crisis to make herself indispensable, Evelyn Cross's voice cut through. Make poor Elias dependent on her. The tide was shifting. Rowan felt it happening, felt the room's attention sliding from the evidence to her credibility, from what Voss had done to who she was, or rather, who she wasn't, not local, not connected, not trustworthy. None of that changes the evidence, Elias said loudly. None of that explains the missing money or the forged signature or the evidence provided by your employee, Voss interrupted. An employee you hired after she collapsed on your doorstep. An employee who now lives in your home. Tell me, Elias, how much of your judgment regarding Miss Vale is professional and how much is personal? The insinuation landed exactly as intended. Elias went very still. What are you implying? I'm implying that a lonely widower might not be thinking clearly, that a woman with certain motivations might exploit that loneliness, that all of this, he gestured at the documents, might be an elaborate scheme to secure her position in your household by manufacturing a crisis only she can solve. That's not what's happening. Nora stood up, her voice shaking with anger. Sweetheart, Voss's tone gentled. I know you want to believe the best of people, but adults understand that the world is more complicated than "don't talk to me like I'm stupid," Nora snapped. I've seen the ledgers. I've checked the math myself. The money is missing. The signatures are forged. Those are facts that don't care about how you feel about Rowan. A child defending, I'm not a child. I'm 16 years old and I can read financial statements better than half the men in this room. And everything Rowan found is true. Clara stood up beside her sister. You're just mad because you got caught. Clara, Elias started. But Clara was already moving toward the front of the hall, small and fierce, and absolutely fearless. She planted herself directly in front of Gideon Voss and looked up at him. You came to our house when Mama was dying, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You sat at our table, you ate our food. You told Papa you'd help us. You told me everything would be okay. Voss's smooth expression finally cracked slightly. Clara, I did help. You stole from us. Her voice didn't waver. You used Mama's sickness. You made Papa sign things when he was too sad to think straight. And now you're trying to make everyone think Rowan's the bad person because that's easier than admitting what you did. That's not... My mama taught me to tell the truth even when it's hard, even when people don't want to hear it. Clara's eyes were wet, but her voice stayed strong. So here's the truth. You're a liar. You're a thief. And you thought we were too sad and too broken to ever figure it out. The hall had gone completely silent. Everyone was staring at this 10-year-old girl facing down one of the most powerful men in the territory. Voss looked at Halloran. James, this is absurd. You're going to let a child's emotional outburst. Let her finish, Halloran said quietly. Clara turned to face the crowd. I know some of you don't like Rowan, she said. I know you think she doesn't belong here. I know you think she's weird or wrong or whatever else you've been saying. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But she saved us. She figured out what he did. And if you run her out of town because you care more about Mr. Voss being rich and important than you care about what's true, then you're just as bad as he is. She walked back to her seat beside Rowan. The silence that followed felt enormous. Then, from the back of the hall, someone stood up. Old Jacob Morrison, who owned the ranch 3 miles east of the Mercer property. He was 70-something, had lived in the valley longer than almost anyone, and rarely spoke at meetings. I got a question, he said in his rough, gravelly voice. Halloran nodded. Go ahead, Jacob. Mr. Voss helped me refinance my property last year. Told me he could get me better terms than the bank. Said he was doing it as a favor because we'd been neighbors so long. I remember, Voss said carefully. Well, I've been looking at my paperwork lately. Curious thing. The interest rate he got me was actually higher than what the bank offered. And there's a clause in there about mineral rights that I don't remember discussing. Voss's smile had frozen in place. Jacob, if there's been a misunderstanding, did the same thing to my nephew? Another voice called out. Convinced him to consolidate his debts. Now his land's collateral on a loan he didn't know he was taking. And my daughter, someone else said, handled her inheritance after my wife passed. Somehow it ended up being 30% less than we thought. The voices started multiplying, people standing, sharing stories, comparing notes. All the small irregularities that had seemed like honest mistakes or bad luck when they happened in isolation suddenly looked like a pattern when laid out together. Halloran banged the gavel. Order, one at a time. But the room had tipped. What had started as skepticism toward Rowan was transforming into scrutiny of Voss. People were pulling out documents, checking dates, questioning terms they'd accepted without reading closely. The careful veneer of trust he'd built was cracking. Voss stood. This is ridiculous. You're letting mass hysteria. Sir, Halloran interrupted, I think you should stop talking now. I have a right to defend myself against... You have a right to remain silent while I decide whether to launch a formal investigation, and I strongly suggest you exercise that right. Voss's face went rigid. For the first time all evening, he looked genuinely rattled. His attorney, Thomas Garrett, appeared at his elbow whispering urgently. Voss listened, then nodded once. I'll cooperate fully with any investigation, Voss said, his voice tight. But I want it noted that these accusations are being driven by a woman with no standing in this community. A woman who materialized out of nowhere with convenient expertise and dubious motivations. He looked directly at Rowan. You think you've won something here, he said quietly, But all you've done is make yourself a target. You have no idea what you've started." "I know exactly what I've started," Rowan said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I started people asking questions, looking at their contracts, checking their numbers. That's all any of this is. People finally looking at what you did when they weren't paying attention. Noble speech. We'll see how noble you feel when the consequences arrive." Halloran banged the gavel hard. "That's enough. Mr. Voss, you're dismissed. We'll be in touch regarding a formal inquiry." Voss left without another word, his attorney trailing behind him. The crowd erupted into conversation the moment he was gone. Halloran banged the gavel repeatedly until something resembling order returned. "Given the seriousness of these allegations," he announced, "I'm ordering a formal investigation into Mr. Voss's business dealings in Black Hollow Valley. All debt claims against the Mercer Ranch are suspended pending the outcome. Anyone else who believes they may have been affected should file a complaint with my office." He looked at Rowan. "Miss Vale, you'll need to make yourself available for testimony." "Yes, sir. And Mr. Mercer, you'll need to provide access to all relevant financial records." "Of course." "Then this meeting is adjourned." The gavel came down one final time. People swarmed immediately. Some approached Elias with handshakes and support. Others cornered Rowan with questions about their own financial situations. A few stood back watching with expressions that ranged from impressed to hostile. Evelyn Cross remained seated, staring at Rowan with an expression that was hard to read. Not quite approval, not quite respect, something closer to grudging acknowledgement that she'd miscalculated. Rowan met her gaze steadily. Evelyn stood and left without a word. Outside the hall, as they walked toward the wagon, Elias finally let out a long breath. "Well," he said, "that happened." "We did it," Nora said, sounding slightly stunned. "We actually did it." "Did I do good?" Clara asked. "With the speech?" Elias pulled her into a hug. "You did perfect." "I was scared." "Being brave means doing it even when you're scared. You were very brave." Clara hugged him back hard, then turned and hugged Rowan just as tightly. Rowan held the girl close, feeling the adrenaline finally starting to drain away and leave her shaky. They'd done it. They'd actually stood up in front of the whole valley and told the truth. And people had listened. Not everyone. Not even most people, maybe. But enough. The ride home was quiet, exhaustion settling over all of them like a heavy blanket. The girls dozed against each other in the back of the wagon, while Elias drove and Rowan sat beside him staring at the stars. "Thank you," Elias said eventually. "For what?" "For being right, for being brave, for standing there and taking everything they threw at you. Didn't have much choice. You had plenty of choices. You could have run, could have backed down, could have let me handle it alone." He glanced at her. "You didn't. Your daughters were braver than I was. My daughters were following your example." They didn't talk the rest of the way home, but when they arrived and Elias carried first Clara, then Nora, inside to their beds, and Rowan stood alone in the kitchen staring at the cold stove, he came back down and found her there. "You okay?" he asked. "Ask me tomorrow." "Fair enough." He started to leave, then paused. "Rowan? Yeah? I meant what I said earlier, about you saving us. That was an exaggeration. You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe. Probably not." He rubbed his face tiredly. "But either way, I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you stayed." "Me too." He went upstairs. Rowan stayed in the kitchen a while longer, listening to the house settle, feeling the weight of what they'd accomplished and what it had cost and what was still coming. Because Voss's threat echoed in her mind. "You have no idea what you've started." She was afraid he might be right. The consequences arrived faster than expected. The morning after the town meeting, Rowan woke to the sound of wagon wheels on gravel. Too many wagon wheels. She was at the window before her eyes fully opened, looking out to see 3 separate groups approaching the ranch from different directions. For a terrible second, she thought it was trouble. Then she recognized Jacob Morrison in the lead wagon, followed by the Henderson family and the Chens. They weren't coming with hostility. They were coming with questions. By the time she'd dressed and made it to the kitchen, Elias was already outside talking to Morrison while a growing crowd gathered in the yard. Rowan counted at least 15 people, and more were arriving by the minute. She found Nora standing at the kitchen door watching the scene unfold. "What's happening?" Rowan asked. They want you to look at their records, Nor said. Everyone who thinks Voss might have cheated them. They're bringing their paperwork. All of them? Looks like. Rowan's stomach nodded. This was exactly what Voss had warned against. Every person she helped became another witness against him, another target for retaliation, another piece of evidence that she was orchestrating something larger than simple bookkeeping. But these were people who needed help, people who'd been cheated the same way the Mercers had been cheated. She couldn't turn them away just because it was dangerous. Elias came inside looking slightly overwhelmed. There's about 20 people out there now. More coming, probably. They all want you to examine their contracts and accounts. I can do that. Rowan, you understand what this means? If you find fraud in all these cases, Voss isn't just going to fight back against us. He's going to come after everyone involved. I know. These people don't. Not really. They're angry and they want answers, but they don't understand how ugly this could get. Rowan looked out at the crowd, saw ranchers who'd worked this land for decades, families who'd built their lives here, people who'd trusted the wrong person and were just now realizing it. Then I guess we better make sure they understand before we start, she said. They gathered everyone in the barn, 23 people total, ranging from Jacob Morrison at 70-something down to Ellen Chen, who couldn't have been older than 25. They stood in a rough semicircle, holding leather folders and wooden boxes full of papers, expressions ranging from hopeful to nervous to outright scared. Elias spoke first. Before we go any further, he said, everyone needs to understand what you're asking. If Rowan examines your records and finds evidence of fraud, you become part of a legal case against Gideon Voss. That means testifying. That means your finances becoming public record. That means Voss and his lawyers will go through every detail of your life looking for ways to discredit you. He already discredited himself, Morrison said. Boyce stood up in that meeting and didn't deny half of what was said. Not denying isn't the same as admitting. He's got resources, lawyers, political connections. He can make this fight last year's and cost more than most of us can afford. So what are you saying? Ellen Chen asked. We should just let him get away with it? I'm saying you should know what you're getting into before you commit. We already committed, Morrison said. Moment we stood up in that meeting. You think Voss is going to forget who spoke against him? Might as well see it through. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Rowan stepped forward. Mr. Mercer's right about the risks, but he's also right that you're already involved. So if we're doing this, we do it carefully. Methodically, we document everything. We make sure the evidence is ironclad before we make any accusations. How long will that take? Asked Thomas Brennan, whose weather-beaten face suggested he'd been ranching since before most of them were born. Depends on how much material you have. Could be days, could be weeks. We got time, Brennan said. What we don't got is trust that the system's going to protect us if we don't protect ourselves. That sentiment seemed to settle over the group like a shared understanding. They spent the rest of the morning organizing. Rowan set up a makeshift office in the barn using old shipping crates as desks and hay bales as chairs. She created a system for intake, having each person fill out a basic questionnaire about their dealings with Voss before she looked at any documents. Names, dates, amounts, witnesses, the kind of foundational information that would be needed for formal complaints. Nora volunteered to help with the organization, creating files for each family and keeping track of which documents had been reviewed and which still needed examination. Clara appointed herself refreshment coordinator and spent the afternoon bringing water and coffee to everyone working. By sunset, Rowan had conducted preliminary reviews of 8 cases. All 8 showed irregularities. Not all as dramatic as the Mercer situation, but consistent patterns. Inflated fees, hidden clauses, interest rates that didn't match verbal agreements, small thefts spread across years that added up to substantial losses. It's systematic, Rowan told Elias that night after everyone had finally left. Not opportunistic. He didn't just cheat people when convenient opportunities arose. He built a whole operation around it. How much are we talking total? Based on what I've seen so far, conservatively, $40,000. Maybe more. Elias whistled low. That's enough to destroy him completely if we can prove it, which is why he's going to fight like hell to stop us. The fighting started 3 days later. Rowan was in town purchasing supplies when she noticed people staring. Not the curious looks from before the meeting, but something harder, more hostile. She tried to ignore it, focusing on her shopping list, but the whispers followed her through every store. At the general store, Margaret Hendricks stood behind the counter with her arms crossed. "We're not serving you," she said flatly. Rowan stopped. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. This establishment doesn't serve troublemakers. I'm just trying to buy flour and you're trying to destroy this town's economy. Gideon Voss employs half the people in this valley one way or another. You think ruining him doesn't hurt the rest of us? He's a thief. He's a businessman. There's a difference." Margaret's voice was cold. "And even if he did cut some corners, that doesn't give you the right to waltz in here and tear apart deals that have been settled for years. You're going to cost people their livelihoods. He already cost them their money. Small amounts most of them never would have noticed if you hadn't gone digging. Now everyone's angry and suspicious, and the whole valley's turning against each other." A man Rowan didn't recognize spoke up from near the back of the store. "She's right. My brother works for Voss's lumber operation. Now there's talk of shutting down while this investigation happens. That's 15 jobs gone because some outsider decided to play hero. I'm not playing anything, You're just causing problems," Margaret interrupted. "And you need to leave. Now." Rowan set down her basket and walked out. Her hands were shaking. She'd expected pushback from Voss's allies, expected some people to defend him out of loyalty or self-interest. But she hadn't expected to be blamed for the economic fallout of exposing his crimes. Hadn't expected people to be angrier at her for finding the fraud than at him for committing it. She was halfway to the wagon when someone called her name. Ruth Morrison approached carefully, like she was afraid of being seen talking to Rowan in public. "Don't listen to Margaret," Ruth said quietly. "She's scared. Her husband owes money to one of Voss's subsidiaries. She thinks if Voss goes down, they'll call in the debt." "Will they?" "Probably. But that's not your fault. That's the system Voss built. You're just exposing it." "Doesn't feel that way." "No. I imagine it doesn't." Ruth glanced around to make sure nobody was watching. "Listen, some of us appreciate what you're doing. We just can't say it out loud right now. Too risky." "I understand." "Do you? Because it's going to get worse before it gets better. Voss has people, loyal people, people who benefit from the way things are. They're going to push back hard." "I know." Ruth squeezed her arm briefly. "Then be careful. And know that you're not as alone as it feels." She walked away quickly. Rowan climbed into the wagon and drove home with an empty basket and a hollow feeling in her chest. The hostility escalated over the following week. Someone painted "liar" across the Mercer Ranch gate in dripping red letters. Clara came home from school crying because other children had started calling Rowan a whore and saying she'd tricked Elias into loving her. The feed supplier refused to deliver their regular order, claiming unexpected shortages even though everyone knew he had plenty in stock. And then the official letter arrived. It came from Thomas Garrett, Voss's attorney, delivered by a courier who wouldn't make eye contact. Rowan opened it at the kitchen table while Elias and the girls watched. The language was dense and legal, but the message was clear. Gideon Voss was filing a formal defamation suit against Rowan Vale for making false accusations that damaged his reputation and business interests. He was seeking damages in the amount of $50,000. $50,000. More money than Rowan would see in 5 lifetimes. "They can't do this," Nora said. "You told the truth. That's not defamation." "They can absolutely do this," Elias said, reading over Rowan's shoulder. "Whether they win is another question, but they can file it and make her defend against it and drag it out until she's broke and exhausted." "It's a pressure tactic," Rowan said quietly. "Force me to choose between fighting Voss's criminal case and defending myself in civil court. I can't afford both. Nobody could. We'll figure it out. Elias, $50,000. Even if I win, the legal fees alone." "We'll figure it out," he repeated firmly. But even he didn't sound convinced. That night, Rowan seriously considered leaving. Not running away exactly, more like strategic retreat. Get out before things got worse, before her presence caused more damage to the Mercer family, before the debt from defending herself destroyed any chance she had at a future. She was packing her bag when Clara appeared in the doorway. "You promised," the girl said. Her voice was small and betrayed. Rowan froze. "Clara, you promised you wouldn't leave. You promised." "I know, but..." "So you lied." Tears streamed down Clara's face. "Everyone always lies. They say they'll stay and then they leave. They say they care and then they go away. Mama said she'd get better and she died. You said you'd stay and now you're packing. Clara, listen to me. No. The girl's voice rose to something between a sob and a shout. I don't want to listen. I don't want more promises. I just want people to stop leaving. She turned and ran. Rowan heard her footsteps pounding up the stairs, heard the slam of a bedroom door. She sat down on the bed with her half-packed bag and put her head in her hands. Elias found her there 20 minutes later. Clara told Nora you're leaving, he said. I'm thinking about it. Want to talk me through that thinking? Rowan gestured at the letter still sitting on her bedside table. $50,000, Elias. That suit isn't about winning. It's about breaking me, making an example, showing everyone else what happens when you stand up to powerful people. So you're going to prove him right by running? I'm going to stop making things worse for your family. You're not making things worse. Voss is. The people defending him are. The system that lets men like him operate unchecked is. He sat down beside her. You're just the one brave enough to say it out loud. Brave is going to bankrupt me. Maybe. Probably. He was quiet for a moment. You know what Catherine told me when she got diagnosed? She said fear makes sense, but it doesn't make decisions. That we get to be scared and still choose what's right. What's right is going to destroy me. What's right is fighting, together, not because it's easy or safe, but because it matters. He looked at her directly. You matter. To Clara, to Nora, to me. And if you leave now, you're teaching them that mattering isn't enough. That love isn't enough. That when things get hard, people give up. I'm trying to protect them. No. You're trying to protect yourself, which I understand, but it's not the same thing. The words hit harder than they should have because they were true. She wasn't leaving to spare the girl's pain. She was leaving because she was terrified. Because running was the pattern she knew, the survival mechanism she'd relied on her whole life. Stay nowhere long enough to get hurt. Leave before people could leave you. Protect yourself because nobody else would. But Clara had asked her to stay. Nora had asked her to stay. Elias wanted her to stay, and maybe for once protecting herself wasn't the same as surviving. I'm scared, she admitted. Good. That means you're paying attention. I don't know how to fight someone like Voss. Neither do I, but we've got something he doesn't. What's that? We're right, and we're not alone. He stood. Tomorrow morning, go apologize to Clara. Then we go see Prosecutor Halloran and tell him about the defamation suit. Then we keep doing what we've been doing, documenting evidence, building the case, fighting back. And if we lose, then we lose knowing we tried. That's better than winning by giving up. He left her alone to decide. Rowan sat there for a long time, looking at her packed bag and the letter threatening to destroy her and the life she'd somehow started building in this impossible place. Finally, she unpacked the bag, piece by piece, putting her few belongings back where they belonged. The next morning, she found Clara at the kitchen table picking at her breakfast. Rowan sat down across from her. I'm sorry. Clara didn't look up. For which part? For making you think I'd break my promise, for letting my fear matter more than your trust. Are you staying? Yes. Promise? I promise. For real this time. Even when it's scary, even when it's hard. Clara finally looked up, eyes still red from crying. It's really hard. I know. People are being mean. I know. I don't like it. Me neither. Clara was quiet for a moment, then, Mama used to say that doing the right thing costs something. That's how you know it matters. Rowan's throat tightened. Your mama was smart. She was. Clara pushed her eggs around her plate. She also said that family isn't just blood. It's who shows up, who stays, who fights for you when things get bad. Yeah? Yeah. Clara met her eyes. So I guess you're family now. Something broke open in Rowan's chest. The good kind of breaking, the kind that let light in. I guess I am, she whispered. They went to see Prosecutor Halloran that afternoon. His office was cramped and overflowing with paperwork, file boxes stacked against every wall like fortifications against chaos. Halloran himself looked even more exhausted than he had at the town meeting. Glasses perched on his head, shirt wrinkled like he'd slept in it. I heard about the defamation suit, he said before they could speak. Voss's lawyer sent me a courtesy copy. Courtesy, Elias said flatly. Warning, more like. Trying to intimidate you. Intimidate me too, probably. Halloran gestured for them to sit. It's garbage. Won't hold up. But that's not really the point. The point is to make fighting too expensive, Rowan said when chad. Exactly. Tie you up in legal proceedings. Force you to spend money you don't have defending yourself. Hope you run out of resources before the criminal investigation concludes. He pulled out a thick folder. Good news is, the investigation is moving faster than Voss expected. How fast? Elias asked. Fast enough that I've got warrants being issued this week for all his business records, bank statements, contract files, correspondence, everything. Halloran looked at Rowan. Your preliminary findings gave me enough for probable cause. Now we dig deeper. Will it be enough to prosecute? If what you found holds up, absolutely. We're talking fraud, forgery, possibly racketeering, depending on how extensive this operation was. He paused. But I need you to understand something. A case this big, against someone this connected, it's not going to be clean. Voss will use every trick available. He'll delay. He'll file motions. He'll attack every witness. Including me, Rowan said. Especially you. You're the linchpin. Everything starts with your analysis. If he can discredit you, he can cast doubt on the entire case. Halloran leaned back in his chair. So I need to ask, is there anything in your past he can use? Anything that would make a jury question your credibility? Rowan had known this question was coming, had dreaded it. I've moved around a lot, she said carefully. Different jobs, different towns. Some people might see that as suspicious. Why'd you move so much? Because staying in places that didn't want me seemed pointless. You ever been arrested? No. Ever been fired for cause? No, I've left jobs, been let go when operations changed hands, but never for misconduct. Any financial irregularities? Debts you couldn't pay? Bankruptcies? I've been poor, that's not a crime. No, but it's something a good defense attorney will use to suggest desperation. Suggest you fabricated evidence to secure employment with the Mercers. Rowan's hands clenched. I didn't fabricate anything. I believe you, but belief isn't evidence. I need you prepared for what's coming. Voss's lawyers will dig into every aspect of your life. They'll talk to every person you've ever worked for. They'll find every gap in your employment history and turn it into something sinister. Let them look, Elias said. Won't change the facts. Facts matter less than narrative in a courtroom. You know that. Halloran looked at them both seriously. I'm going to prosecute this case. I'm going to put everything I have into it, but you need to be realistic about the odds. Voss has resources we don't, lawyers we can't match, political connections that run deep. So what are you saying? Elias asked. I'm saying this is winnable, but it's not guaranteed, and the cost of fighting might be more than you're prepared to pay. He focused on Rowan. Especially for you. Win or lose, your life becomes public record. Your past gets examined. Your credibility gets questioned. People will say terrible things about you. They're already saying terrible things about me. This will be worse. I know. Halloran studied her for a long moment. Why are you doing this? You could leave. Start over somewhere else. Nobody would blame you. Rowan thought about Clara asking her to stay. Thought about Nora standing beside her. Thought about Elias choosing to fight instead of accepting the loss. Because someone has to, she said finally. Because people got hurt, and nobody was going to do anything about it until someone decided it mattered enough to risk something. And you decided you were that someone. Didn't really feel like deciding, more like it was already decided and I just had to catch up to it. Halloran smiled slightly. You're either very brave or very foolish. Can it be both? Usually is. He stood. All right, we move forward. I'll keep you updated on the investigation's progress. You keep documenting what you find from the other families. We build this case together and we make it airtight. They shook hands. Outside, walking back to the wagon, Elias said, You sure about this? No, but I'm sure about not running. That's close enough. The investigation unfolded over the next 6 weeks. Rowan continued reviewing records for the families who'd come forward, finding fraud in case after case. Halloran's office executed search warrants on Voss's properties and businesses, seizing boxes of documents. The county brought in a forensic accountant from Helena to assist with the analysis. The evidence piled up, but so did the pressure. Someone threw a rock through the mercer's kitchen window in the middle of the night, wrapped in a note that said, "Leave while you can." The bank called in a small loan Elias had taken out 2 years earlier, demanding immediate payment even though it wasn't due for another year. Clara got into a fight at school defending Rowan's reputation and came home with a black eye and a 3-day suspension. And the whispers continued. People who'd smiled at Rowan in town now crossed the street to avoid her. Stores that had sold to the Mercers for decades suddenly had supply problems. Even some of the families she'd helped started backing away, afraid of the escalating conflict. But others stepped forward. Jacob Morrison organized a group of ranchers to help the Mercers with spring planning when it became clear they couldn't hire enough workers. Ruth Morrison's husband, the doctor, started treating Clara's black eye for free and made it clear his office would always be available to the Mercer family, regardless of community politics. Ellen Chen showed up one morning with 3 other young women, all carrying cleaning supplies and food, determined to help maintain the household while Rowan spent 14-hour days buried in paperwork. The valley was fracturing along fault lines nobody had noticed before, and Rowan stood at the center of it, exhausted and scared and somehow still standing. One evening, nearly 2 months after the town meeting, Halloran sent word that he needed to see them immediately. They arrived at his office to find him looking simultaneously triumphant and grim. "We've got him," he said without preamble. The forensic accountant finished her analysis. Systematic fraud across 47 separate cases. Total damages exceeding $60,000. Forged documents. Falsified contracts. The whole operation. "That's good," Elias said carefully. "So why do you look like that?" "Because Voss knows we've got him, and he's making a move." "What kind of move?" Halloran slid a document across his desk. It was a plea agreement. Voss was offering to plead guilty to reduce charges, pay restitution to all affected parties, and accept a suspended sentence in exchange for avoiding trial. "He walks away?" Rowan asked, her voice rising. "After everything he did, he just pays the money back and walks away?" "It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple. He steals from dozens of families, destroys people's lives, and his punishment is writing some checks and maybe doing community service? His punishment is admitting guilt, having his reputation destroyed, losing his business licenses, being permanently barred from financial services in this territory." Halloran held up his hands. "I know it's not satisfying, but it's guaranteed. We take this deal, everyone gets their money back. It's over." "We can beat him at trial," Elias said. "Maybe. Probably. But trials are unpredictable. Juries are unpredictable. And if we lose, nobody gets anything. He walks away completely clean." Rowan stared at the plea agreement. "What happens to the defamation suit against me?" "Dropped as part of the agreement." "And the families who've been ostracized for supporting us? The people who lost business standing up for what's right? What do they get?" Halloran was quiet. Because they all knew the answer. Those people got nothing. The intangible costs of fighting couldn't be resolved with a plea deal. "I need to think about this," Rowan said. "You've got 24 hours. After that, the offer expires and we proceed to trial." They left without responding. The ride home was silent. That night, the 4 of them sat around the kitchen table discussing what to do. "We should reject it," Nora said immediately. "Make him face a real trial, real consequences." "Real risk," Elias countered. "If we lose at trial, he gets away with everything." "We won't lose." Halloran said the evidence is strong. "Strong isn't certain." "Take the deal," Clara said quietly. Everyone looked at her. "Why?" Nora asked. "Because everyone gets their money back. Because it stops the fighting. Because people can stop being afraid." Clara looked at Rowan. "Because it lets you be safe again." Rowan felt tears prick her eyes. "Baby, this isn't about me." "Yes, it is. It's about all of us. And I'm tired of people being mean. I'm tired of rocks through windows and notes threatening us, and you crying when you think nobody's listening." Clara's voice shook. "I want it to be over. Even if it means Voss doesn't really pay for what he did." "He pays some. That's more than we had before Rowan came." They sat in heavy silence. Finally, Elias spoke. "Rowan gets to decide. This started with her findings. The defamation suit is against her. She's taken the most hits throughout this whole thing, she decides. All eyes turned to her. Rowan looked at the three faces watching her, the families she'd somehow become part of, the people who'd stood beside her when it would have been easier to step away. I need to sleep on it, she said. But she didn't sleep. She lay awake all night thinking about justice and practicality, about winning and surviving, about what she owed to the families who'd trusted her and what she owed to the families sitting at this table. By morning, she'd made her decision. She found them at breakfast. Elias was burning eggs again, the smell of scorched protein filling the kitchen. Clara sat at the table drawing horses in the margins of yesterday's newspaper. Nora poured coffee with the careful deliberation of someone buying time before difficult conversations. They all looked up when Rowan entered. "We take the deal," she said. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Nora set down the coffee pot hard enough to rattle the table. "That's not justice." "No," Rowan agreed. "It's not." "Then why?" "Because justice and winning aren't always the same thing. Because Clara's right that people need this to end. Because 47 families get their money back, and that matters more than watching Gideon Voss suffer." "He deserves to suffer," Nora said. "Probably, but what we deserve and what we get are rarely aligned." Rowan sat down at the table. "He admits guilt, loses his business, becomes a cautionary tale. That's not nothing." "It's not enough." "It never is." Rowan looked at the girl directly. "You're going to learn this as you get older. The world doesn't operate on fairness. It operates on what's possible. And what's possible right now is getting people's money back and making sure Voss can never do this again. That has to be enough because it's all we've got." Elias had been quiet through the exchange. Now he turned from the stove, spatula in hand. "You're sure?" "No. But I'm sure I can't keep asking your family to sacrifice for my need to see someone punished properly." "It's not just your need." "Yes, it is. You all would have been fine accepting the plea from the beginning. This hesitation is mine. This anger about him getting off easy is mine." She looked around the table. "And I don't get to keep feeding my anger when it costs you safety." Clara got up and hugged her, just wrapped her small arms around Rowan's waist and held on. "Thank you," the girl whispered. Rowan held her close, feeling the weight of the decision settle somewhere deep in her chest. Not quite peace. Not quite resignation. Something in between that felt like growing up. They went to Halloran's office that afternoon. The prosecutor looked relieved when Rowan told him they'd accept the plea agreement. "I think you're making the right choice," he said. "Not the satisfying choice, maybe, but the right one." "When does it happen?" Elias asked. "Formal hearing is scheduled for next week. Voss appears before the judge, enters his plea, restitution terms are established. Should be straightforward." "And after that?" "After that, he's done. Barred from practicing any form of financial services in Montana territory. His assets get liquidated to pay restitution. Any business licenses revoked." Halloran paused. "He'll probably leave. Men like him don't stay in places where everyone knows what they did." "Good," Rowan said quietly. The hearing took place on a Tuesday morning. The courtroom was packed with people who'd been affected by Voss's fraud. 47 families represented by faces ranging from elderly Jacob Morrison to young Ellen Chen. They filled the gallery like witnesses to something between justice and compromise. Gideon Voss entered wearing an expensive suit and an expression of practiced humility. He didn't look at anyone as he walked to the defendant's table, didn't acknowledge the people he'd stolen from, just stared straight ahead like this was a minor inconvenience rather than the destruction of everything he'd built. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Margaret Thornton, brought in from Helena specifically because she had no connections to Black Hollow Valley. She reviewed the plea agreement with the kind of methodical attention that suggested she'd seen enough criminals to know when one was getting off light. "Mr. Voss," she said finally, "you understand the terms being offered?" "Yes, Your Honor. You admit to 47 counts of fraud, multiple counts of forgery, and racketeering in the operation of your financial services business?" A long pause. Then, "Yes, Your Honor." "And you understand that in exchange for this plea, you're required to pay full restitution to all affected parties, surrender your business licenses, and accept a 5-year suspended sentence contingent on compliance with all terms?" "I understand." You also understand that violation of any term results in immediate activation of a 10-year prison sentence? Yes. Judge Thornton looked at him over her glasses. I want to be clear, Mr. Voss. This court doesn't take lightly what you've done. You exploited people's trust. You used their grief, their need, their hope against them. You built an empire on theft dressed up as help. Voss said nothing. The only reason you're not going to prison today is because the victims in this case have chosen mercy over vengeance. They've chosen guaranteed restitution over the uncertainty of trial. That's their grace, not yours. Don't mistake this outcome for anything other than what it is, people being better than you deserve. She signed the agreement. Restitution payments begin immediately. First distribution within 30 days. You have 6 months to liquidate all business holdings and settle all claims. After that, you leave Montana territory and you don't come back. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down. It was over. Just like that. No dramatic confrontation. No impassioned speeches. Just signatures and schedules and the mechanical process of dismantling what Voss had built. People filed out of the courtroom quietly, not celebrating exactly, but lighter somehow. Like they'd been carrying weight for so long that putting it down felt strange even when it was relief. Outside, in the cold spring sunshine, Jacob Morrison approached Rowan. You did a good thing, he said. I just looked at some numbers. You did more than that. You stood up when standing up was dangerous. You gave the rest of us permission to be angry about things we'd learned to accept. He held out his hand. Thank you. She shook it, feeling the calluses from 70 years of ranch work. One by one, others came to offer similar sentiments. Quiet thanks. Firm handshakes. Acknowledgments that what she'd done mattered even if the outcome wasn't perfect. Ellen Chen was last. What are you going to do now? She asked Rowan. Haven't thought that far ahead. You could stay, open a bookkeeping practice, help people manage their accounts honestly. There's definitely a need for it now. Rowan smiled slightly. That's assuming people would trust me after all this. Some people. The right people. Ellen glanced toward where Elias stood talking with Morrison. People who know what you're worth. The words stayed with Rowan as they drove home. What was she worth? She'd spent so much of her life measuring her value by what others thought of her, by whether she was wanted, by whether she belonged. She'd run from place to place trying to find somewhere that would see her as valuable instead of inconvenient. But maybe value wasn't something other people assigned. Maybe it was something you claimed for yourself by deciding what you stood for, and then standing there even when it hurt. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, Rowan found Elias on the porch. He was sitting on the steps looking out at the dark valley, shoulders relaxed in a way they hadn't been for months. The tension that had been holding him rigid since Catherine's death had finally started to ease. She sat down beside him. It's done, he said. Yeah. You okay with how it ended? Rowan considered the question. I'm okay with choosing what was right over what felt good. That's something, at least. That's everything. He was quiet for a moment. You thought about Ellen's suggestion, opening a practice? Thought about it, don't know if it's realistic. Half the valley still thinks I'm a troublemaker. Half the valley thought that before you proved Voss was a fraud, the other half knows you saved their livelihoods. He looked at her. You could build something here, if you wanted to. Could. Doesn't mean I should. Why not? She struggled to articulate the fear underneath. Because every place I've ever built something, it fell apart. Because every time I've let myself believe I belonged somewhere, I ended up leaving. Because I don't know how to trust that staying works. So learn. It's not that simple. It never is. But simple and possible aren't the same thing either. Elias shifted to face her fully. You want to know what I think? Do I have a choice? No. He smiled slightly. I think you're scared of wanting things. Scared that if you admit you want to stay, want to build a life here, want to be part of this family, something will come along and take it away. So you keep one foot out the door just in case. That's not... It's exactly that. You've been packed and ready to run since the day you arrived. Even after you promised to stay, even after Clara called you family, even now after everything we've been through. Part of you is still expecting this to end. His words cut close to something true. What if it does end? She asked quietly. What if I stay and build something and let myself believe in it, and then it all falls apart anyway? Then it falls apart, and you survive it the way you've survived everything else. But at least you'll have had something real first. He took her hand. I'm not asking you to stop being scared. I'm asking you to be scared and stay anyway. That's a lot to ask. I know, but I'm asking anyway. She looked at their joined hands, his rough and scarred from ranch work, hers ink-stained and calloused from different labor. Two people who'd learned to survive alone trying to figure out how to build something together. If I stay, she said slowly, I want to do it right. Not as your employee, not as the outsider you took pity on, as someone who actually belongs here. You already belong here. Not officially. Elias went very still. What are you saying? Rowan took a breath. I'm saying that if we're doing this, if we're building something, we should build it on purpose, not drift into it because it's convenient or comfortable. Choose it deliberately. Rowan Vale, are you proposing to me? I'm proposing that we stop pretending this is temporary, that we acknowledge what this is becoming and decide if we want it. And what is it becoming? A family, a real one. Messy and complicated and nothing like what families are supposed to look like, but real. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, genuinely smiled, in a way she hadn't seen since before Catherine died. Yes, he said simply. Yes? Yes. Let's build it on purpose. Let's choose it deliberately. Let's be a family that doesn't look like what families are supposed to look like, but works anyway. Rowan felt something unfurl in her chest, relief and terror and hope all tangled together. Okay, she whispered. Okay. They sat together on the porch steps, hands linked, watching stars emerge over the valley. Everything was still uncertain. Money was still tight. Half the town still viewed her with suspicion. The work of rebuilding reputations and relationships would take years, but for the first time since she could remember, Rowan wasn't planning her exit strategy. She was planning to stay. They married 6 weeks later. Not a big ceremony, didn't want or need one. Just immediate family and the few friends who'd stood by them through everything. Jacob Morrison attended along with Ruth and her husband. Ellen Chen came with her siblings. Prosecutor Halloran even made an appearance, looking pleased that at least one story from his caseload had a halfway decent ending. The ceremony took place on the ranch, outside under a sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. Nora and Clara stood up beside Rowan, both wearing new dresses that Ellen's sister had sewn. Morrison walked Rowan down the makeshift aisle because she had no father to do it, and he'd appointed himself to the role with the kind of gruff affection that suggested he'd needed someone to care for as much as she'd needed someone to care about her. Judge Thornton officiated, her stern courtroom demeanor softening into something almost warm. Marriage, she said, is choosing someone every day, even on days when choosing is hard, even on days when staying feels impossible, even on days when you'd rather run. She looked at Rowan when she said that last part. Rowan looked back steadily. Not running, not anymore. They said simple vows. Nothing flowery or performative, just honest promises about showing up and staying put and choosing each other deliberately even when it would be easier not to. When Elias kissed her, Clara cheered loud enough to startle the horses in the nearby paddock. The reception was potluck. Everyone brought something. Morrison brought whiskey that was probably illegal but tasted like fire and friendship. The Chens brought enough food to feed everyone twice over. Ruth Morrison brought a cake that leaned slightly to one side but tasted perfect. They ate and drank and laughed in a way that felt like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. As the sun started setting, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber, Rowan found herself standing slightly apart from the celebration, watching Elias laugh at something Morrison said, his whole face transformed by genuine joy. Watching Nora dancing with Clara, both girls spinning in circles until they collapsed dizzy and giggling. Watching the community that had initially rejected her slowly learning to accept that she might actually belong here. Ruth Morrison appeared beside her with 2 glasses of whiskey. You did it, Ruth said, handing her a glass. Did what? Made a place for yourself, against some pretty steep odds. Jury's still out on whether I'll last. Maybe. But you're here now, that counts. They clinked glasses and drank. The whiskey burned going down, sharp and cleansing. Can I tell you something? Ruth said after a moment. Sure. When you first showed up, I thought you'd be gone in a week. You had that look people get when they're just passing through. Like you were already halfway to somewhere else, even while you were standing still. I was. I know, but you're not anymore. That's what marriage is, I think. Deciding to stand still long enough to actually be somewhere instead of always being between places. Rowan looked at the ring on her finger. Simple silver band, nothing fancy, but solid and real and permanent. I'm terrified, she admitted. Good. Would be weird if you weren't. Ruth smiled. Being terrified means you actually care about something. That's when life gets interesting. Over the following months, Rowan did exactly what Ellen had suggested. She opened a bookkeeping practice. Not anything fancy, just a small office in town, a hand-painted sign that said R. Mercer, Accounting Services, and a commitment to treating people's money with the honesty they deserved. Business started slow. Many people were still suspicious of the outsider woman who'd brought down Gideon Voss. They muttered that she was probably running her own scam, that she'd eventually reveal herself to be just as corrupt as the man she'd exposed. But others remembered what she'd done, remembered that she'd stood up when standing up was dangerous, remembered that she'd chosen protecting people over protecting herself. Those people became her first clients. Jacob Morrison hired her to organize his accounts. Ellen Chen recommended her to 3 other families. Slowly, carefully, word spread that Rowan Mercer was someone you could trust. Not everyone came around. Margaret Hendricks still refused to serve her at the general store. Evelyn Cross still looked at her with cold disapproval at town meetings. Some families who'd lost business during the Voss investigation never forgave her for being the catalyst. Rowan learned to live with being disliked by people who valued order over justice. The ranch thrived under their combined management. Elias handled the livestock and land while Rowan managed the finances and contracts. They worked as a team in a way that felt natural, complementary, like 2 people who'd figured out how to build something larger than what either could create alone. Nora graduated from school with honors and announced her intention to study law. Someone needs to make sure people like Voss get actual consequences, she said. Might as well be me. She left for university that fall, fierce and brilliant, and determined to make the world fairer than she'd found it. Clara grew taller and more confident, her earlier sweetness tempered by the steel she'd discovered during the fight against Voss. She still loved horses, still drew in the margins of everything, but now she also asked questions about money and power and how systems worked. She was becoming someone who wouldn't accept easy answers just because they were comfortable. One evening, nearly 2 years after the plea deal, Rowan was closing up her office in town when someone knocked on the door. She opened it to find Evelyn Cross standing there. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then Evelyn said, "May I come in?" Rowan stepped aside. Evelyn entered slowly, looking around the small office with its neat files and practical furniture. She sat down in the chair across from Rowan's desk without being invited. "I owe you an apology," Evelyn said. Rowan blinked. "I'm sorry?" "An apology. For how I treated you when you first arrived. For trying to run you out of town. For believing that maintaining appearances mattered more than acknowledging truth." "Mrs. Cross, let me finish." Evelyn's voice was sharp but not unkind. "I spent 40 years in this valley believing that order was the same as righteousness, that if we just maintained proper standards and followed established rules, everything would work out fairly. You showed me that was a lie. You didn't mean to do a lot of things. Didn't mean to expose the most respected businessmen in the territory as a fraud. Didn't mean to reveal that our entire community had been complicit in looking the other way. Didn't mean to prove that an outsider with no standing could see things more clearly than people who'd lived here their whole lives." Evelyn looked at her directly. "But you did all of those things anyway, and you were right." Rowan didn't know what to say. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Evelyn continued. "I don't deserve it. I tried to destroy you because you threatened the comfortable lies I'd built my authority on. That was wrong, small and cruel and wrong. Why are you telling me this now?" "Because my granddaughter is starting school next year, and I want her growing up in a valley that values truth over comfort, justice over order, people over systems." She stood. "You built that. Not alone, but you started it. And I wanted you to know that some of us see it now, see what you did and why it mattered." She walked to the door, then paused. "Also," she said without turning around, "if you're still looking for clients, I could use someone to examine my financial records. Make sure everything is actually the way I think it is. Then she left. Rowan sat alone in her office for a long time after that, feeling something shift in her understanding of people and redemption and the slow, difficult work of change. That night she told Elias about Evelyn's visit. She apologized, Rowan said, still sounding surprised. Actually apologized. People can surprise you. I thought she'd hate me forever. Maybe she did. Maybe she still does a little, but she also respects you now. Sometimes that matters more. Rowan thought about that. When did you get so wise? When I married someone who taught me that fear and courage aren't opposites, that you can be terrified and still do the right thing, that running and staying are both choices and choosing to stay is braver. I didn't teach you that. You lived it. Same thing. 5 years after Rowan collapsed on the Mercer porch half dead from starvation, she stood in that same spot watching the valley transform with spring. The ranch had doubled in size. Her accounting practice was thriving. Nora was in her 3rd year of law school and already taking cases through the university's legal clinic. Clara was 14 and talking about becoming a veterinarian so she could care for ranch animals across the territory. The valley had changed too. Not completely. Not perfectly. There were still people who looked at Rowan with suspicion. Still families who blamed her for the economic disruption that came with exposing Voss's fraud. Still whispers about the outsider woman who'd married the widower too soon and too conveniently. But there were also new standards. Contracts got read more carefully now. Financial terms got questioned instead of accepted. When businesses tried to take advantage of people's trust or grief or desperation, someone spoke up. The valley had learned that order without justice was just comfortable oppression. And it had learned that lesson because one starving woman had been too stubborn to stay silent. Elias found her on the porch as the sun was setting. "You're thinking too much," he said. "Probably." "What about?" "About how strange it is that this is my life now. That I have a home, a family, a place that actually wants me." Strange good or strange bad? Strange terrifying, like I keep waiting for someone to realize they made a mistake and take it all back. He put his arm around her shoulders. "Nobody's taking anything back. You earned this. Not by being perfect or fitting some mold of how women are supposed to be, by being exactly who you are and refusing to apologize for it. That's very poetic for someone who burns eggs." "I contain multitudes." She leaned into him, feeling safe in a way that still felt new and fragile and precious. Inside the house, Clara was arguing with Nora about something inconsequential. Their voices carried through the open windows, sharp and warm and alive. The sound of family, the sound of home. "You know what amazes me?" Elias asked quietly. "What?" "That the world almost lost you. That you came that close to dying in the snow and nobody would have ever known what they missed." Rowan thought about that younger version of herself, starving and desperate and convinced she had nothing left to offer. Thought about how close she'd come to just lying down in the snow and letting go. "The world didn't almost lose me," she said finally. "I almost lost myself. There's a difference." "Yeah?" "Yeah. The world was going to be fine either way. I'm the one who would have missed out on this." She gestured at the ranch, the valley, the life they'd built. "On belonging somewhere. On mattering to people. On being seen for what I actually am instead of what I'm supposed to be." "And what are you?" She considered the question seriously. Not the broken thing people had seen when she collapsed on their porch. Not the troublemaker who'd disrupted the comfortable lies. Not the outsider who'd never quite fit in. "I'm someone who stayed," she said. "Someone who chose to be brave when being scared would have been easier. Someone who decided that being wanted wasn't the same as being valuable, and that value was something you claimed for yourself." Elias kissed the top of her head. "Damn right you are." They stood together on the porch watching the last light drain from the valley. Everything was imperfect. The ranch still struggled some months. Her practice still had clients who questioned her because she was a woman doing work they thought belonged to men. There were still people in town who would never fully accept her. But she had a family who loved her, a community that mostly respected her, a life she'd built on purpose instead of by accident. And every morning when she woke up in this house that had once been a stranger's porch she'd collapsed on half dead, she made the same choice: to stay, to keep building. to keep believing that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, not because it was easy, not because it was comfortable, but because she'd finally learned that belonging wasn't something other people gave you. It was something you chose for yourself, every single day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. And that choice, repeated enough times, eventually became something that looked like home.